Hi, and welcome to this week's Some Assembly Required video blog. I'm Sarah Hammerker, and I'm glad you joined me. Today I want to talk about anxiety in parenting and how being an anxious parent can be bad for your own health and for your children as well. And let me start by giving you some examples of how this anxiety manifests itself. I recently spoke with a parent who has three children, and her youngest is about to enter kindergarten. And she's already concerned. The child had been evaluated at school, and everything seemed to be fine. But this child is very different from this mother's other children, and she's concerned that this child, there may be something else going on because this child doesn't know her ABCs, or this child smiles funny when they tell you to smile. Um, Now, there may be something to this, but in listening to her talk, I could tell that this was becoming a bigger issue before it was an issue, if you know what I mean. Sometimes we look at a kid and we're like, oh my goodness, they can't do this. Well, they might not be able to do that. And there may be an impediment to that. There may be a learning disability, a learning delay. There could just be that the child needs to mature. And I think we forget that that our kids are all different. They learn differently. This doesn't mean we ignore things. It means we keep an eye on things. But it also means that we're not overly anxious if one of our children is not growing like the others, if one of our children is doing something a little differently than the others. And we kind of rely on other teachers and other parents, and we can talk about it, but we have to be careful that we're not blowing things out of proportion. Um, there, there's some, I mean, we all have those moments where we wish we would have noticed something sooner. One of my best examples of this is my youngest hated to have shoes on. I mean, he hated to put shoes on. I don't care what I was trying to do. He really hated it. So when he was about 2 or 3, probably about 2, I'm cramming him in those little, little high top shoes, and he's wailing about it. But he always wailed about it. And then that would happen to be the day that, but once I got them on, he never said a word. He just hated having them put on. We go to the shoe store, find out 3 sizes too small. Those shoes were 3 sizes too small. So he had a reason for being cranky about it. And I always consider that, I jokingly call that one of my bad parenting moments, when I didn't notice that my toddler had really outgrown issues, not just by a little, 3 sizes too small. So I give that as an example, and that's a silly example, and a lot of you are probably facing maybe larger issues than that. But it still helps to have a sense of humor when you're raising kids, but also not to be overly anxious about our children. Our anxiety can manifest itself in many ways. One, we can have apocalyptic thinking, which means that we look at our kid and we look at our young child, generally a young child, could even be a teenager, and we say, well, if they can't do this, then this bad thing is going to happen, and this even worse thing is going to happen. And before we know it, we have them homeless and living under a bridge for the rest of their life, because we think that one of the examples of that I usually give about this kind of thinking is the child who can't tie his shoes. So the mom continues to tie his shoes because she's anxious that if he can't tie them properly, he may trip and fall down. He may trip and fall down, and that may motivate him to tie his shoes, but she just doesn't think he's going to trip and fall down. She thinks he's going to fall down a set of stairs and become paralyzed for the rest of his life. That's apocalyptic thinking, thinking the very, very worst thing that can happen, and then you're either paralyzed, and so you can't do anything. You either help your child beyond what the child needs help. If we're tying, an 8-year-old shoes, unless there's something really wrong with your kid, an 8-year-old ought to be able to tie his own shoes. Seriously. Or we hold them too tightly. We're helicopter parenting. So how do we not have anxiety in parenting? This manifests itself in school. This can manifest itself in sports. This can manifest itself when we compare our children, even within our own family, to other kids. The comparison is really hard to not do. So here, let me give you a few ways to control your anxiety as parents, to not have that apocalyptic thinking, to be a little more breathe in, breathe out. It's okay. Let's not be anxious. Let's not get our kids something to be anxious about. All right, number one is don't think the worst. Or, as I like to tell parents, think the very worst. Look at your child and think, what is the worst thing that can happen? Now, what is the probability of that thing happening? Very slim. So that's when you kind of realize, well, my child needs to learn to tie the shoe. Why does he need to learn to tie the shoe? Because he's old enough to do it, and tying a shoe is a skill that everyone should know how to do. Therefore, I'm going to let him tie his shoes. Is he going to fall down? Yes. Will he break a bone? Possibly. Will that mean he will never graduate from high school? No. Let's put it in perspective. So stop the apocalyptic thinking. Be more realistic and realize that we cannot protect our kids from everything. They're going to fail. They're going to fall down and get hurt. And part of our job as parents is to be there, not to prevent them, but to guide them in the aftermath. So they say that it's okay to fail. It's okay to fall down. It's okay to miss the winning goal for your team on the championship. It's okay to lose. And it's okay to win. So we need to help them navigate that. So let's stop the apocalyptic thinking and let them navigate that so that we are more calm and confident parents, and they are more calm and confident kids. Second thing you can do is stop the comparison. This really when you have more than one child in your immediate family, or maybe you just compare them to other kids in the neighborhood, every kid is different. Every kid learns differently. This is especially important in school. Like I have 2 girls and 2 boys. My 2 girls are older. And even they were very, very different. But my 2 boys especially were very different from my 2 girls. For example, my 2 boys didn't learn to read as quickly as my 2 girls. Now, I could have been anxious about this. I could have been pushing this because my girls were reading pretty well at the end of kindergarten. And my boys were not. They took them till their 1st grade and sometimes even beyond 1st grade to learn to read well. So I kind of just relaxed about this. I could have been anxious about it, but I didn't because I was monitoring them. Did they love reading? Yes. Were they engaged in school? For the most part. Did the teachers seem to think that they were on track with other kids in their class? Were they typical kindergartners? Were they typical 1st graders? Yes. Were they at the head of their class? No. Is that really important in kindergarten and 1st grade? The answer is no. It's not really important. They'll all catch up. It'll all be fine. So don't apocalyptic thinking. Don't compare. Another thing is to step back from their lives. Sometimes we get overly anxious because we're too invested in our children. Whose life is it? Is it your life or your child's life? It's your child's life. You should have a life of your own. I always encourage parents when they start getting overly anxious and stuff, I'm like, find a hobby. Do a new hobby. Either do a new hobby, join a book club. Make sure you get out with other women and don't talk about your kids. Go and have fun and do something for yourself. Once a week, once a month. Get the focus off your kids and onto you a little bit more, and that will help you be a little less anxious. So to recap real quick, no comparison with your other kids. Each child is differently. No apocalyptic thinking. A child who cannot read at the end of kindergarten is not going to flunk out of school in high school. And even a high schooler who doesn't want to do his work is not going to end up without a job or only working at a fast food restaurant. That doesn't go to reason. Sometimes kids have to figure these things out for themselves. Remember, that's your child's life and not yours. So let's be less anxious. Let's be more calm. Let's enjoy our kids more. Well, I really appreciate you joining me for this week's video blog on Some Assembly Required. I hope you'll share it and that you'll come back and join me next week. Thanks.